talk about the elaboration likelihood model, or the ELM model of advertising, and we'll talk about it with respect to one small little aspect, which is, do we go in for an emotional ad or for a rational ad? And this could be in the context of a new product, or this could be in the context of an existing product. But let's imagine that this is for a new product. Okay. Let me give you a little perspective on this. When color printers were first introduced and HP started to go after this market, they actually invested quite a bit on one particular campaign. And the campaign was, I think it was called All-in-One and the Do-It-Yourself, right? So where you would have a small little jingle come on, and a person would actually freeze moments. So freeze this particular moment, and that would be a photograph, and then it would move, and then another moment would be frozen, and a photograph would be taken. And so they had the jingle going, and then had this, and so it was pretty much an emotional ad. They invested quite a bit. From what I have read, it seems that they've invested hundreds of millions of dollars behind this campaign. And this is it. This is, apart from backing an important product line at that point, is also money that you take from other products that they could have promoted. So is this the way to go? And there's experiments done and research that shows that you could promote ads emotionally, or you could talk about the rational aspects of the ad. And we talk about where people elaborate on the central message or the rational aspects of the ad as central processing, and people that basically go in for the emotional ad, or basically try to set up a mood where consumers are likely to be amenable to any message that you provide, as peripheral processing. So here was one experiment done way back in the 60s and 70s when this elaboration likelihood model by Petit and Cacioppo was being designed, where they had stimuli that were created that looked almost similar except for a few things. So in this, this is one condition, for example, where they ran, and they had these, for the good times or the bad times, a beer that they came up with, that I don't know if this is a true brand or not, break, and they had a list of rational arguments for why you should purchase it, which would be the one on the left. And then they had different sets of people that they thought were the spokesperson for the product, or the likely consumer. And they did this, and they found what people's perceptions were in the ad and how likely they were to buy the beer after they'd seen the ad. And some of the findings related to the fact that it did matter if the person had low involvement or high involvement with the product category. And low involvement would mean that the person was less motivated in the product category, and hence would process the central message to a less extent. And for people like these, and you can imagine that there are lots of consumers like this who don't have too much of an involvement in the beer category and probably drink it once in a while. And for them, providing either strong or weak arguments does not make a difference, which is what is shown in the lower part of the graph, which is that it almost seems that the attitude, which is post-communication attitude, which is your likability of the ad and the product, seems to be equal for both the strong and the weak arguments. However, the number of arguments that you're going to provide, even if those are weak arguments, if you present 9 arguments as compared to 3 arguments, would make a big difference for people that are low involvement. However, for people that are high involved in the category, know about beer, process this information much more elaborately, for them, providing even one argument that's strong is enough. And so you can imagine that if this is the way to go, then depending on your segment size, and if your segments or your consumers are entirely high involvement, then you would probably come up with 1 or 2 slogans, and those slogans would argue on the highest, probably the highest picked up attribute. So Coors, for example, talks about the chillness of the ad, and chillness of the product, for example, and so forth. So you could think about one of those. Whereas Bud Light, on the other hand, even though calories are important, comes up with different kinds of funny commercials that talks about the mood of the product and the people that use it. Okay, that's just one of the findings that you will get, and this article is a part of your reading packet with this class. What I would suggest is read it exhaustively, and it lays out different conditions under which you would probably push peripheral processing, and different other conditions where you push central processing. But the true finding is that basically high involvement, you use powerful when people are arguments, and it's basically you sell the steak, and if it's low involvement, you use attractive sources or the number of arguments, and you sell the sizzle. And so here's a formal model of how the BLM model looks like. So if you're thinking about communication, communication can come in different forms, advertising being one part of it. For example, sales communication, sales persuasion is another part, public relations is another, and right now you have internet banner ads and other kinds of brand communities, and so there's communication that happens there too. And any sort of persuasive communication leads to people first attending and comprehending what the source communicates. And once that's comprehended and some attention's paid, then you start to process the information that is being presented. And the processing can be at a very mundane peripheral stage where you're just basically not paying all your attentional resources to the ad, or you could be highly involved. And if you're highly involved, it takes on the central route where you're basically using your entire schema that's been created about the product in your memory. You draw on that, and then you use your working memory in your brain, and then you try and make sense out of it. However, if you go to the low processing route, your schema is just activated. It is not used for processing, and part of your short-term memory is being used. And that takes on, when you go the high involvement route, what happens is the cognitive responses, which is basically the arguments that are presented, are argued for and against in your mind, and you provide a cognitive response on whether it's actually a good thing or a bad thing. And based on that cognitive response, then you change your belief or attitude towards the product. And your attitude could be a permanent change because you're looking to move people on, and by attitude I mean people either put things on a like or a dislike, and you would assume that people that basically like your product more will end up buying your product. So people that have a positive attitude are more likely to have a behavior that's conducive to the high attitude. And people that have a low attitude would demonstrate in a different way, would not buy a product, would have negative word of mouth and other kinds of behavioral fallouts from that. However, if you think about the low involvement processing, what happens with the low involvement processing is that there's a small little belief change, but more importantly, prior to your attitude change, you do a behavior that basically you try and buy the product and try it out and then say, I like the product once I purchased it. Let me talk about the iPod, for example. When the iPod was introduced, they had two different ways that they could have gone with. One was they could have gone with presenting it almost similar to what other electronic gadgets at that point were being touted for. So Dell, for example, would lay out the entire specs of the product, and then you would read it, and then you would try and decipher what it meant. That's one way the iPod could have gone. The other way the iPod could have gone, and which is what they chose, was they used these jingles, and they used a couple of dancing figures that basically laid out the fact that it was a fun product, and they used analogies in terms of how big the iPod was. It fits into your pocket. It's the size of a deck of cards. It carries 1,000 songs, which is your entire album in one small little device, and so forth. So they went the route where they provided a few analogies that made some sense, and they went the jingle route. Okay, so that was much more peripheral processing as compared to central processing. And over a period of time, Apple per se, with all its products, has gone the low processing route, and its design has been one of the things that's also perceived as a central processing for those that are high involved in the product category. Okay. So here's an emotional ad versus a rational ad. These are taken from a textbook that is a standard for looking at these kinds of old ads in the print media. And you can imagine similar parallels that exist in today's internet age. So for example, Lexus, when it came out, this product laid out a small little pictorial of the product, but had lots of script written about it, lots of detail in terms of the design, the engineering of the product, and how it would do things to you. Whereas Infinity, on the other hand, didn't even show the product, just had some mood set up for how you would feel when the product was used. Okay, and what does high involvement mean? Okay, so that's what Petty and Cacioppo explored in their elaboration likelihood model. And any sort of persuasive communication, which they examined with the series of the experiments that they did, was there are two conditions. And the first condition for central processing to happen is, are people motivated or not? So if you go back to the printer, the color printers when they were introduced, so instead of color printing, and photographs being printed at Costco, Walmart, and other kinds of outside source. You're not outsourcing it, but you're bringing it home, and in your room, you actually have your digital camera or your computer being connected to it, and you're pulling these photographs and you're printing it through a device that you own. And hopefully the quality is not exactly the same, but it's enough for you to record and print out much more than you would if you're printing outside. And so are people motivated to do it at home? And are people motivated both by the photographs that it produces? Are people motivated by the specs of the device? So for example, how many prints per minute? What quality does it print? What kind of paper does it use? How big is it? What kinds of devices does it connect to? Um, what kind of memory does it have? And how long does it take to print each one? And if it does print these out, what's the flexibility in terms of the color shades that it can hold? Can it go from black and white to color and so forth? Are people motivated to know more about it? And if people are motivated to know about each one of those features, do they have the ability? So for example, my grandmother has a lot of interest in knowing about the iPad and the tablets and everything else on all the devices that exist. But does she have the ability to decipher the communication that most of these people provide in terms of the technical specs? Obviously not. So you can imagine that both of these conditions need to be met if central processing needs to be the route that you're going to take in your advertising. So the consumer needs to be motivated to process central message and should have the ability to process that message. And if both of these conditions are met, then there's a chance that you could get them to process cognitively the messages. And in the process of cognitively processing the messages, their attitudes, if they're unfavorable, could be turned to become favorable attitudes. If they're already favorable, you could build on those and make them stronger attitudes. And if they have neutral attitude or thoughts that predominate, then you could embed a few positive thoughts there. Okay? And so you're looking at a cognitive structure change where people's schema in the mind, the memory becomes a little bit different from when it started. Okay? And so that would be an idea where you're talking about a central processing. Two conditions to be met. The consumer needs to be motivated and have the ability. And your ad needs to engage the consumer in order to fulfill their motivation and their ability. And here's an ad for that, if you will. Central processing route. This is your old way of communicating on Dell computers. Would be that basically you lay out the specs and then offer a few rational arguments for why Dell is the best, and then Intel jumped in and they probably had their small little logo and everything that it brought to the table. It's pretty. If you look at that ad, it has the left side of the equation, if you will, the price that you pay. The right side of the equation is all the benefits that you get, and it lays out the value for money that you get. And it's for you to decipher each one and its weight that it has for you as a person to see if that the left side is lower than the right side, and hence you're willing to buy the product. However, if either one of those conditions are not met, that is, consumers are not motivated or do not have the ability, then the route to go is peripheral processing. So a peripheral processing can be you create positive and negative affect. And there's various ways to create positive and negative affect. Fear appeals are one, humor is another. You could bring in a credible source. You could bring in a polarizing source, if you will. The kinds of people that you use in the ads, do they look like supermodels? Do they look like regular people? What kinds of arguments are you going to provide? All of those get into this peripheral cue. Do you use music? What kinds of music do you use? Do you use fast-paced music? Do you use slow-paced music? Do you get the adrenaline flowing, or do you put people in a relaxed mode in order to read your product? Even there's lots of research findings. So for example, if you want to make a person think creatively, do you think that the person should be upbeat and the music should do that, or should you put them in a relaxed stage? So think about it. We won't get into that aspect, but those are aspects that have been dealt with in prior research. Here's another ad, for example, here's a Heinz ad. Heinz product per se is not a glamorous product, doesn't have too many attributes to play upon, and so they use predominantly humor in their ads and some pick up on one or two of these attributes. So for example, must not have been Heinz, and so it's got a couple of forks in it. There's a policeman in the ad, a little bit of humor. Remember, Heinz, the user is different from the purchaser. The purchaser is predominantly the mom in the house, and the users are the kids. So the mom's less motivated about the attributes, just wants value for money and just wants, if you will, a reliable brand to purchase and what the kids like. And so Heinz, their old product line is based on frivolous attributes. So for example, introducing green in the product with a little bit of a flavor change was one of those. And if people do not have the ability, and they're motivated but do not have the ability, so for example, color printers was one such category where people that print at home are motivated to know about it but do not have the ability to figure out all the different kinds of things, specs that a color printer has, then too you go in for a peripheral cue. And using celebrities is a good way to go. For here, for example, Scottie Pippen, a famous NBA player, probably offers credibility to a product that's like a deodorant just because of the fact that he plays quite a bit, sweats a lot, uses this product quite a bit. And so his claim that this product is good would be enough for you, and the Dentist Association recommending a product would be similar kinds of things. Okay. So source credibility in terms of the source or a celebrity being used, there are two different aspects to it. Do they have the expertise, and are they trustworthy? Sometimes they might overshadow, for example, the product. We did a couple where we actually looked at the previous ads that Britney Spears had come in, and we asked people to remember the ads or remember the person who's a spokesperson. Most people were able to recognize and remember Britney Spears, but were less likely to remember the product that she was endorsing. So in those cases, what happens is a celebrity overshadows the product, and sometimes you don't know if it's Pepsi or Coke. Except, for example, there's some brands which have successfully used these celebrities, and they've been, if you will, locked into those products. So, for example, Michael Jordan for Nike, Cindy Crawford for Pepsi. All of these are products where the celebrity is tied to the product. But other cases, it's less likely to be. And so, milk advertising is extraordinarily good in my view, at least, that they use lots of celebrities, and so they don't tie it down to one celebrity, but all of them have a milk mustache, talk about the benefits of using it, and hopefully it appeals to a slightly younger audience too in terms of the humor that it brings out. Okay. Again, peripheral processing, milk. You could talk about the benefits and talk about the bovine versus no bovine and other kinds of things, but they've not gone down that route, and they've gone down the celebrity route. And so just to recap, for a persuasive message to go through central processing, for consumers to actually elaborate on the central message that's played out, they need to be motivated and to be able to have the ability to understand what the message is. And if they do, then they elaborate on the central message, and if the central message plays out the way it should, then there's a long-term change, and there's a change in the schema or the memory that the consumer holds for those product categories. Unless and until those two conditions are met, you don't go down the central processing route, you go down the peripheral processing route, where you try and use heuristics, which are shortcuts that consumers use. A celebrity is a heuristic that they use. If a celebrity uses it, it's good enough for me, is a heuristic that we use. And these shortcuts to be easily persuaded. So for example, good music, that if I feel happy, then the heuristic that I use is I use my own emotions as a heuristic. I feel happy when I use this product because the good music playing. I don't believe, I don't go back and look at all the aspects of the product. All I do is I believe my feeling, and my feeling is that I feel good about the product. So for example, Hawaii ads puts you in a very good frame of mind and then says, oh, I feel good about it. And if I feel so good looking at the pictures, I might feel even better going to the place. That's the peripheral processing route. A few other things, once you get to the central message of what you're going to play out to the ad, and you take one of those routes, we're not going to talk about the creatives per se. There are various different ways. This is not an advertising course, but if you do create an ad that plays out the central processing route, then how many times should you show it? How many times should you show the peripheral processing route? Either way, I think either of those, if there's learning, and oftentimes there's learning only in a central processing, but even there, if the consumers are highly involved, they could learn pretty fast. So it doesn't matter which kind of ad and which kind of consumer. If there's no learning to be done beyond a particular effect, particular time exposure, then there's going to be fatigue. And this fatigue, then your positives could quickly turn into negatives, and negatives could then become a negative attitude influencing. So So Gecko, for example, the Geico ads, they played on the fact that it was a British accent. They played on the fact that there was a cute little animal there, and it was different from the other products. And they played around with that for a long period of time. Um, and similar kinds of things for another product on the same insurance front was using cavemen. And I think the cavemen part of it started to have much more fatigue in their ads as compared to the Gecko, because the Gecko were still creative and they played around with different other versions of that. Okay, just gives you an idea. But one thing we do know, it's called the fluency effect, is the more times that we hear something, the more we believe it. One of the classic pieces of research on this was some people showed Chinese characters over and over again below your threshold, which means that they were flashed for about 20 milliseconds when you were staring at a screen. And if you'd seen that multiple times, that somehow it entered your memory without you processing it, which means that it just went to long-term memory. Once you had that, then what happened was you started liking those characters more. So if I showed you those Chinese characters in either in the form of a brand name, if I showed them to you as part of a crossword puzzle, etc., you started liking them more. Just tells you that the more times that we see something, the more we put into our long-term memory when we retrieve them. We pull them not just with terms of what it is, but we also pull them with a positive affect stamp to it. Sometimes if you don't have a negative stamp. So for example, if you go to Hawaii and your day has been washed off, it's been a bad day, then you basically process that information, you store it in long-term memory, that here's a picture of Hawaii in my memory, plus a stamp that it was a bad day, and there's a negative affect there, right? And so shark cartilage will help arthritis. I think it's an often repeated phrase, and the more you repeat it, the more people believe it's true. And if the more people believe it's true, then if I bring that in my ad, it comes quicker from your memory to from your long-term memory to your short-term memory. And once it comes to your short-term memory, you start processing it for the current context. And you can think about other kinds of things where people, so for example, using celebrities, you start thinking about the fact that these Air Jordan shoes, even if it's true or not, might be that makes you leap higher, right? But might make Jordan leap higher. I don't know if it's true that you can leap higher with it, or I can leap higher with it, right? If I don't have the ability of Jordan. So a few things, sell the steak or the sizzle. So central processing route, I would argue, is that where you're looking at long-lasting central cues, etc., you would probably sell the steak. And if you're using the peripheral processing route, where you're looking at low involvement, you're looking at the attractness of the source, etc., you'd probably use peripheral cues, which would probably sell the sizzle. Okay. How do you distinguish between high involvement, low involvement consumers? Could be is a question that I want you to think about. And for different product categories, there could be different ways that you could find out high involvement, low involvement. They're not oftentimes tied to age, income, gender, etc. But it's a person. For example, the National Basketball Association has been trying to find out how do you find these high involvement consumers? Are they the same as the college basketball enthusiasts, or are they different? If they're different, what way are they different? Okay, and the college basketball, if you will, NCAA, they've been also trying to find out who are these people. Are they just the college students, or are they more than that? Okay. So we started off with talking about the elaboration likelihood model, which is the ELM, and we talked about two different methods. One was the central processing, the other was the peripheral processing. And we talked about two different conditions that had to be met for people to do a central processing route, which is the motivation, the ability to process the central message. If that was not true, and either one of those was not true, then you would use a peripheral cue. And there are various ways you can use a peripheral cue. You can use number of sources, you can use source, you can use music, you can use brand logos, okay? And those can be computer heuristics. And so that's it for today. And hopefully you will read up the note and find out different other conditions where the elaborate likelihood models